was the hardest thing for you this fall? Now, this has been an extraordinarily hard year, and I don't know what all may have happened to you. Outside of a personal tragedy, if I had to guess, for those living in America, the hardest thing this fall may have been the presidential election. Whatever your politics are, win or lose, the struggle for the governance of this country was no light matter. The fears and concerns we have about our politics and our nation do weigh heavily. When things weigh heavily on me, the best way I've found to deal with it is to examine how faith in God interacts with this burden. What truth from God speaks into this reality? Now, in many ways, that's the whole point of doing this series. Not so much as a reaction to the presidential elections per se, but more as a reaction to all the difficulties of this year. With all that 2020 has thrown up, what truth am I holding on to? What hope do I have? Faith in God is the answer, holding on to His promises. And that's what the testimony we've been looking at in Hebrews 11 is all about. Today's verse shows the author getting overwhelmed by all the examples of God meeting and blessing the faith of His people. Hebrews 11 verses 32 to 34 read, "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon or Barak or Samson or Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouth of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies." The thing that struck me from these verses was the list of men the author rushes over. With the possible exception of Samuel, you can find a lot of dirt on these guys. They weren't the best folks. They did act in faith in key moments, but they all had some pretty major failings. The other thing to note is that all these guys demonstrated faith in pursuing God's promise of a kingdom. Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, that guy, are all men who acted as leaders of Israel in the book of Judges. And then Samuel and David took the nation of Israel into the time of the kings. If you remember back to God's promise to Abraham, it was to make his descendants into a great nation. And these men followed in that promise. But a promise of a kingdom isn't like the promise to go to the movies or go out for dinner. That type of promise can easily be fulfilled and then it's done. You go see the movie or you go eat and you're done. It's over. But God's promise of a kingdom requires God and man to live together. The promise of a kingdom started to take shape with these Old Testament figures, but it was a promise that they were still counting on. They wanted to see it continue. Their faith wasn't satisfied with one victory in battle. It required a lifetime of trust and looking to God. In that Advent, we too are looking to God for His presence in the continual fulfillment of His promise. We are called to keep living in the midst of the struggles of 2020 with the assurance that God is at work. It's been difficult, yet I know I have seen God provide. I have been reminded that He is sovereign and He is King. And I have seen more of my weakness, as well as God's power to work through even that weakness. So join me this Advent in examining where our faith points us. Are we overwhelmed by the catastrophes of this year? Or is God the promise-keeping King?